Jamila, thank you very much. What I wanted to do this morning, and thank you all very much for being here, is put this discussion of the so-called fiscal cliff, or some of us see it as maybe a fiscal slope, into a somewhat different context than we hear in Capitol Hill. And the first point I think to be made is when we talk about deficit reduction, it has to be put into the context of what is going on economically in the United States of America. And the bottom line here is that in our country today, rather tragically, we have the most unequal distribution of wealth and income of any major country on earth, and it is worse today than it has been in any time since 1929. And that is a major point that has to be introduced in this discussion. Because if Jamila and I go out for lunch and we're spending $50 and I'm making all kinds of money and my tax rates are very low and she's broke and unemployed, and I say, hey, here's the bill, you pay it. Under any definition of morality, that's just not fair. So we're talking about who's going to pick up the tab. And let's look at the reality of what's going on in America today, something we do not talk about enough as a nation. And that is that today, the wealthiest 400 individuals in this country own more wealth than the bottom half of America. 400 people, bottom half of America, 400 own more wealth. Today you have one family, the Walton family, who owns Walmart, who own more wealth than the bottom 40% of the American people. Today, and here's a fact that needs to be pounded away at over and over again, the top 1% owns 42% of the wealth of America. That's an astounding fact. What is even more astounding is that the bottom 60% of America owns 2.3% of the wealth in this country. Today, as Warren Buffett recently pointed out, the 400 wealthiest Americans are now worth a record-breaking $1.7 trillion, more than 5 times what they were worth just 2 decades ago. In other words, when we talk about who picks up the burden for deficit reduction, it has got to be placed within the context of what's going on economically. And what's going on economically, on one hand, are the wealthiest people in this country are doing phenomenally well, while our middle class is disappearing. Now, what's going on for working families? What's going on for the middle class? The Federal Reserve recently reported that median net worth for middle class families dropped by nearly 40% from 2007 to 2010. That's the equivalent of wiping out 18 years of savings for the average middle class family. The distribution of income is even worse. If you can believe it, and again, this is the reality of America today. In 2010, 93% of all new income went to the top 1%, while the remaining 99% of the people shared the remaining 7%. From 1969 to 2009, median earnings for male high school graduates plummeted by almost 50%. Point being that some people in this country are doing phenomenally well, the middle class is disappearing, and low-wage workers are getting clobbered. Now, while the wealthiest people are doing extremely well, and in many cases have never had it so good, their effective, i.e. what they really pay in taxes, has reached the lowest, nearly reached the lowest level in 50 years. Today, there are millionaires all over this country, including folks like Mitt Romney, who are paying a lower effective tax rate than middle-class nurses, teachers, police officers, and firefighters. Warren Buffett, of course, has pointed out that his effective tax rate is lower than his own secretary's. At a time when the middle class is disappearing, when poverty is increasing, and the gap between the very wealthy and everyone else is growing wider and wider, I take offense. I take very deep offense that CEOs like Lloyd Blankfein of Goldman Sachs come to Washington to lecture us on why Congress needs to cut Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. To my mind, this is obscene and extraordinarily arrogant. Here you have our friends on Wall Street who, because of their greed and their recklessness and their illegal behavior, caused the recession that we are experiencing today, which, among many other things, not only led to unemployment, loss of life savings for millions of people, but also less revenue coming into the federal government, one of the major reasons we're in the deficit situation we're in right now. These guys, after giving themselves huge bonuses, in case of Lloyd Blankfein being worth hundreds of millions of dollars, have the arrogance to walk into Congress and say, yeah, I'm worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Thank you for bailing me out. Yeah, I got a big bonus. And now I want you to cut Social Security for the elderly and Medicare and Medicaid for working families. I mean, that is just extraordinary arrogance. Now, the other point that I want to make, first point that I wanted to make is to tell you that in the midst of growing wealth and income inequality, you do not attack and go after the middle class and working families who are already being banged around as a result of this recession. That's just simply unfair. The second point that I want to make, and sometimes my friends in Congress, especially my Republican friends, apparently haven't noticed, is the American people have spoken. Elections have consequences. And the debate over whether we ask the wealthy to pay more in taxes or not, that was kind of resolved on November 6th, when Obama won by some 4 million popular votes, and 25 out of 33 Senate races were won by those people who think that it's time we brought some justice to our tax system. But it is not just an election in which the major issue was whether or not we asked the wealthiest people in this country and large corporations to start paying their fair share of taxes. It is also poll after poll after poll that says the same thing. So what this debate, in my view, is about, it's not left versus right, it's not Democrats versus Republicans. It's very clearly what the American people have said and what the American people believe against a Republican Party which has been incredibly obstinate and is, I think, increasingly being perceived as being way out of touch with what the American people want to see happen. Now, let me just quote, there are many, many polls out there. Let me just quote a few of them. According to a poll commissioned by the National Journal and United Technologies that was done between November 29th and December 2nd of this year, fairly recent, 77% of the American people believe that Social Security should not be cut to reduce the deficit, for very good reasons. They know that Social Security is just life and death for so many of the people in our country. 79% of the American people believe that Medicare should not be cut to reduce the deficit. Those are pretty strong numbers. 63% of the American people believe that Medicaid should not be cut at all to reduce the deficit. An ABC News Washington Post poll conducted between November 21st and November 25th found that 60% of the American people support raising taxes on income of over $250,000 a year. So you have not just an election,